Hello, young men. So last week we talked about ratios, and it was basically an introduction to get you guys to understand what a ratio is. So remember we said that a ratio is a comparison of two or more quantities. So we're going to talk about the different types of ratios that we can rate as it pertains to an illustration. So this is our illustration. And we already talked about the fact that you can write a ratio as a part-to-part ratio or a part-to-whole ratio. There's another type of ratio you can write too, which is a rate, but we're not getting into that yet. We're only going to talk about the part-to-part ratio relationship and the part-to-whole ratio relationship. So when we're looking at this illustration, the first thing we need to do is identify the two parts. So the first part that I see here are the circles. The other part that I see are the triangles. So I know that when I'm looking at this part-to-part relationship, I know that I'm comparing circles and triangles. Now here, I'm going to write down my part-to-part relationship and the three different ways that it can be written. And we talked about in class that it could be written in word form, as a symbol, and as a fraction. So if I'm comparing my circles to my triangles, that is written as 3 circles, because that's how many I have, 2, 4 triangles. And you're probably wondering, why am I writing these words? I already know that it's 3 circles and I know it's 4 triangles, but it's better to write the labels to ensure that you don't make little mistakes. Now, the other way we can write it is using the symbol. We write 3 circles, and we use the colon symbol. 4 triangles. And even though we use a symbol, we still read it as 3 circles to 4 triangles. Then we can write it in fraction form. 3 circles to 4 triangles. And even though it's written as a fraction, it does not mean that it is in fact a fraction. And we'll get into that later on. So now we're looking at another part-to-part ratio relationship from this illustration. So we already compared the circles to the triangles. Now we can compare the triangles to the circles. I know some people watching this video may go, isn't that the same thing? But it's not the same thing, because now we're looking at a comparison of the triangles to the circles, not the circles to the triangles. So we'll write it in word form first. So how many triangles do we have? 4 triangles. 2, 3 circles. Now we're going to write it using the symbol. 4 triangles. 2, remember, even though we're using a symbol, you still read it as 2. 3 circles. And then we also can write it in fraction form. 4 triangles. 2, 3 circles. So we've already, from this illustration, written 2 different part-to-part ratio relationships. And we wrote it in 3 different forms. So now we're going to look at the part-to-whole relationship. So it sounds exactly, or it is exactly how it sounds. The part, we choose one of the parts, and remember our 2 parts are the circles and the triangles. And we're comparing it to the whole. Whole meaning the total amount. So if I'm looking at this illustration, I can say, okay, I'm comparing circles to the total amount of shapes. Or I'm comparing the triangles to the total amount of shapes. So let's look at the circles to the total amount of shapes first. So if I'm starting with circles, then I'm going to put 4 circles. Sorry, not 4 circles. There's 3 circles. That's why I always tell you to label, because you don't want to make that mistake. 3 circles to 7 total shapes. Because we have 7 shapes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'm comparing one part to the whole. The whole meaning the total. And that is once again written in the word form. Now we can write it using the symbol. 3 circles. And we use our symbol. Colon. 7 total shapes. And we can write it in fraction form. 3 circles. 7 total shapes. And if you want to even go even deeper to make sure that you're doing it correctly and you're not making small mistakes, you can even right here circle 2 total. So then you know that you're not making a mistake with your numbers. So now we compared one part, which was the circles, to the total. Now we have another part that we didn't compare in this portion here. So now we're going to compare that here. The triangles to the total amount. So we have how many triangles? So it's triangles to the total. So now we have 4 triangles. 2, 7 total shapes. And we have, well, that's in the word form. Then we can write it as a symbol again. 4 triangles. Symbol form. 2, 7 total shapes. And we can also write it in fraction form. 4 triangles. 2, 7 total shapes. So we looked at the 2 different ratio relationships, part to part, part to whole. We looked at the fact that the part to part relationship can be written in 2 different ways. The part to whole relationship can also be written in 2 different ways. We looked at the fact that it can be written in 3 different forms: word form, symbol form, and fraction form. Now, that doesn't mean that every time you're asked for a ratio relationship that you have to write it in all 3 different forms. You can pick one form and write it in. But if a question asks a specific form, like if it says, write the ratio of circles to triangles in word form, then you would have to write it in word form. Or if it says write it in symbol form or fraction form, you would have to write it in that form. All right, so your homework, which will be due on Tuesday, you're going to use the illustration. And if you notice, this time it's not in, or it's not grouped together, so make sure you're paying attention to that. And you're going to write part to part, well, 2 part to part relationships. You're going to write it into the 3 forms. You're going to write a part to whole relationship, or 2 of those as well. 3 different forms. And then you're going to answer the question, why is order important when creating a ratio? So why is it important to make sure you're paying attention to the order? And you'll get that answer once you answer these 2. If you're not sure what to do, you can go back to the video, or rewind the video, I should say, so that you have a clear understanding, because your illustration won't always be written this way. So now I want you to use that great higher order thinking, your amazing brains, to complete this assignment. This will be due on Tuesday. Peace and love.